I haven't been there, but I was fortunate enough to sit in on an interview with her. Okay? And what the parole board does is they actually look for ways to keep some inmates in prison. Inmates have actually said during the interviews that they've done everything that the board has asked them to do. And the board has gone as far as to say, well, bring us a book report. A book report? Yes, bring us a book report and we'll see you in 3 years. When you have people that commit murder, okay, there's some, they say, oh, they're so heinous, they're so egregious. Well, any murder should be classified as that. But however, now that we put rehabilitation back in the prison name, and most people were under the misconception that was one of prison's missions, was rehabilitation. Okay? When actually the purpose of prison was punishment back in the 80s. Now, the big question should be, when has a person paid their debt to society? That's my question. That's actually a question of a lot of us. As we sit, and I'm talking from the women's prison, we've actually lived with these women for over 20 years. And you see the change in them. You see that they've changed. But some actually have no hope of parole. They keep hoping, but the parole board's still looking for ways to keep them off. And it's, well, when do we forgive? We'll probably never forget. Victims never forget. But we don't.
What's the incentive? What's the motivation of the parole board in being so draconian in the way they handle these inmates?
Political pressure. Pressure from society. You know, you're a lot of times you're governed by what the governor wants. You get a lot of district pressure from representatives. I'll give you a case, for instance, okay, that I often use, and and she knows that I use her name, Betty Broderick, for instance. Famous case down in San Diego. Killed 2 people, okay? But when you really look at the case, okay, Betty only had a problem with Dan. No one else. She could be your neighbor. She could be my neighbor. Has she changed? Sure, she's changed. But notoriety hurts a lot. And as they age, the taxpayers don't see the impact. What society hears is they don't want a politician that's quote unquote soft on crime, not knowing what that really means. Politicians don't want their opponents being able to say, well, that's the person responsible for releasing Susan Atkins. They don't want that, because then they lose their income. But yet and still, as it averages, and you can look on the CDC website, $35,000, $36,000 per inmate. Well, that's not the actual cost of an inmate. That's the average. So when you get an average, that's some costs are cheaper, some costs are higher. When you're looking at someone, for instance, that's 86 years old, on dialysis, or you get an amputee or a double amputee that's served over 25, 30 years, I don't want to take a lot of focus or desensitize and say, well, they only committed a murder. Okay? Yes, they killed someone, but they've changed. Society is not willing to forgive them, but yet we're willing to pay $70,000 to $75,000, probably higher, dollars per year for these inmates to keep them locked up. My question is, what gives society the right, or the parole board, the right, or the jurisdiction to change the sentence of the court? The court never sentenced these inmates to death or life without the possibility. But yet, we keep them in there until they die. I did a research project, and I found that inmates they don't want to die in prison, females. They don't want to die in prison. And later I found there's a lot of other research that supports this. But of course, that's their feeling. Society is driving this. If there was a change in the posture by the legislature, by the governor, I think that you'd see a dramatic decrease in the prison budget, probably prison health care. It's a fine line. I'm not saying that you put some law out that's generic, that covers everyone, because that's where people fail. It's got to be on a case-by-case basis, but it's got to be fair. It's got to be fair. There's a lot of inmates, male included, that are over the age of 55, been in since they were 18 years old. Okay? They got a 7 to life, 10 to life sentence. And they've done 45, 50 years. Their disciplinary record's basically clear. And you're telling me they're still a threat. Okay, they very may well be. But it's hard for me to fathom that you can say that with a straight face if somebody's bedridden, that they're a threat to society. What's the threat? What's the threat if they can barely get around? And the point now is, what I'm seeing is, there's a lot of employers where their employees have been doing all this time. Their kids have grown up. They're willing to take them in, want them there. To babysit. Anything. You know? And that would lower our costs dramatically.
Right. Okay. So, John, I really want to thank you for coming in. There are a few people, again, who can connect the dots of the system. Many people agree that the system must be reformed, but there's not the political will. But you have budgetary, fiscal forces right now that are creating some type of movement. And I think you could be at the center of that movement. Again, few people have the credentials and credibility to discuss this issue practically and intellectually like you've discussed it. I've enjoyed sitting and talking with you. I can feel the fire in your motivation to change this woefully inadequate system. And I want to thank you for coming in and having this candid discussion with us today.
That's been a pleasure. Thank you.